I intend to be brief, but I cannot allow some of the things that have been said here to go unanswered. No one is talking about here the right to adopt. On neither side of this debate is the issue about the right to adopt, because the issue of adoption is governed by the Adoption Act. The Adoption Act sets out what the rights and obligations are, and the obligations that arise relate to acting in the best interests of the child. That's a fundamental obligation that falls upon the government bodies. Now, interestingly, that's the same obligation, precisely the same obligation, that falls upon government instrumentalities, courts and the like, if one looks at the child welfare legislation and created in another jurisdiction under the Family Law Act, precisely the same obligation occurs. What the difference is between the Adoption Act, the child welfare legislation and the family law legislation enacted by the Commonwealth Parliament is that it is only the Adoption Act that creates an additional criteria. You see, under the child welfare legislation passed in every state and under the family law legislation, it says the fundamental obligation is the paramount interests of the child. Everyone must look to the paramount interests of the child. What the Adoption Act does, however, is add the additional criteria, in essence. And that says, putting it colloquially, that gay couples can't adopt. Gay couples can't adopt. That's what it says. Homosexuals, as a couple, can't adopt. It doesn't say a homosexual man or a homosexual woman can't adopt. It doesn't say that. It says a gay couple can't adopt. So if what we're talking about is the fundamental right of a child to be raised by a man and a woman, the simple fact and the reality is that our Adoption Act doesn't make that an obligation, because a single man, irrespective of his sexuality, can adopt, and a single woman, irrespective of their sexuality, can adopt. There is no guarantee that a child who is adopted will be raised by a man and a woman. There is no guarantee that those people will be in a loving relationship. There is no guarantee that they will be in a sexual relationship. None of that exists at all. But there is this additional requirement that it can't be a homosexual couple. Best interest of the child plus an additional criteria. Now, what do we know under the child welfare legislation? Best interests of a child. And of course we do know that in terms of that legislation, that children are brought before courts of law, where reports are prepared day in and day out, and in some of those they provide that the most appropriate place for a child to be placed is with a gay couple. With a gay couple. Time and again that occurs. For those of us who practice in the law, it's not been a secret, it's not been hidden under a rock, it shouldn't come as a blinding flash to anyone in this chamber that has been occurring day in and day out. And if it was the wrong thing to do because of the nature of the child welfare legislation, we know that the matter could be brought back to the court and the child could be snatched away from the couple who are the subject of that foster order. If those children are being abused in some sense, whether physically or psychologically, then the mechanism is there. Indeed, if we go to the adoptive parents, homosexual couple who had a child, of course they're not immune from the child welfare legislation either. If in fact the child is subject to abuse, whether psychological or physical, they too can be snatched up by the child welfare authorities and taken into care and the subject to a foster order with someone else. Now let's move on to the family law legislation. The family law legislation, of course, deals with the paramount interests of the child. And once again, we know, day in and day out, that children are the subject of orders for care, to be placed with one parent or another. We know that in some instances, that the parent with whom the child is placed is in fact in a same-sex relationship. Inevitably, when that occurs, what we see is that the case is run on the basis that the best option for that child is not to be with that homosexual, that same-sex couple. And in truth, stripped of all of what is said, the answer is that child or children should not be with that homosexual couple because they are homosexual. That's what the case is. That's how the case is attempted to be run. And in truth, if you get involved in those cases, indeed, as I have been, one of the things that one is obliged to explain to a parent who seeks to run that argument is it's got to be a little bit better than that. You actually have to show why the child is at risk, and indeed you may be able to. But it's based upon the facts of the case. It's based upon a proper demonstration, not of concerns, not of prejudices, not of homophobia. It's based upon fact. Go to the law. Go to the question of what's in the best interests of the child and construct a case around that issue. If the child's not appropriate to be placed with that homosexual couple, then demonstrate why. Demonstrate why. But don't simply hang a label of, let's be frank, well, they're poofs, and therefore they can't raise children. Because at the end of the day, regrettably, that's how the argument runs. But let's deal with what is, in conclusion, the simple reality of life in Australia today. Why is our family court so busy? Our family court's so busy because relationships break down all the time. That what we're left with in terms of dealing with children in that jurisdiction is the simple, cruel reality that whilst some may be of the view that it's best for a child to be raised by a mother and a father, countless numbers of our children are not raised by a mother and a father in our society. Countless of them are raised simply by one parent. And in many cases, one parent who is scratching the eyes out of the other parent, who is fighting day in and day out, who is psychologically damaging their child because they want to have an argument over the kid or kids. That they will damage the child, that they will tear the child physically from the arms of the other parent because it's their kid, not his or hers. So much for raising a child by a mother and a father. That consistently is what causes damage to children, the fight between two estranged parents. And it's that fight between two estranged parents, irrespective of their sexuality, which is the destructive factor to so many children in our society. The one thing that brings up most consistently a good and caring adult, that changes a child into a caring and thoughtful contributor to our society, is the fact that their parents are loving and caring and nurturing. And the simple reality is, if you can find two people who are loving and caring and nurturing, irrespective of their sexuality, then that kid has got a hell of a sight better chance of survival in a modern society than any other. I say that at the end of the day, find the loving, find the caring, find the nurturing parent, and you're 99.99% of the way. This debate is in truth, at the end of the day, about people's moral perspective. There is no doubt. But tear away the shackles, tear away the blindness, look to the quality of the parent as an individual. Look to the parents as a couple for their caringness, their capacity to nurture, their capacity to love. And you're there, not on the basis of their sexual orientation.